You're listening to the audiobook for Elvis and the Beatles, by Trina Young. Copyright 2018. All rights reserved. Chapter 9, the next chapter. Quote, I don't actually want to be a living legend. Paul McCartney. Elvis did not plan for the meditation garden at Graceland to be his final resting place. In fact, Presley was originally buried at Forest Hill Cemetery in Memphis. However, on August 29, 1977, less than 2 weeks after Elvis was buried, Memphis police became aware of a plot to steal Presley's body and hold it for ransom. As a result, Elvis's and his mother Gladys' remains were moved to Graceland's meditation garden on October 2, 1977 for safekeeping. In subsequent years, Presley's father and grandmother were also buried in the meditation garden. When Elvis was alive, the meditation garden was a place for Elvis to find solitude or have a quiet conversation, away from the non-stop visitors and activities inside the Graceland mansion. Elvis was quite proud of the garden, said Larry Geller, and we spent much time out there when we were in Memphis, unquote. Without knowing it, Elvis had a hand in designing his own memorial. Now the meditation garden at Graceland serves as a centerpiece for Elvis fans from all over the world to pay their respects to the king. At the time of Elvis Presley's death in 1977, his estate was valued between $5 and $10 million, a paltry sum for an entertainer who had earned an estimated $1 billion during his lifetime. After Elvis's father, Vernon Presley, died in 1979, Elvis's ex-wife, Priscilla, was named a trustee of the estate to look out for the interests of her daughter and Elvis's only child, Lisa Marie, who was 11 years old at the time. However, Priscilla quickly discovered that the money left for her daughter, who would receive her inheritance at age 25, was in danger of vanishing. In 1979, the Graceland mansion and grounds cost approximately $480,000 a year to maintain with taxes, insurance, and security for Elvis's gravesite. However, the estate was barely expected to bring in enough to cover those costs. Priscilla debated for 2 years what to do. She considered opening Graceland to the public as a last resort. Graceland was the only thing Elvis and I had that wasn't on public view, Priscilla said in 1989. To open up your home was like being robbed. Priscilla was forced to make a decision in 1981 when the IRS imposed a $10 million inheritance tax on the estate. We didn't have the finances to pay the IRS or state taxes, Priscilla explained. If I didn't make the decision to open his home for his fans and the public to visit, we would have lost it. It was not an easy decision, unquote. From the beginning, Priscilla hired businessman Jack Sawton to run and manage Graceland. Before opening Graceland, he and Priscilla visited many other successful historic homes and museums around the country to see how they ran things. Hearst Castle was the one that impressed me the most because there was nothing commercial on the grounds, Priscilla said. It was kept exactly the same as when people had lived there. That's what I wanted, too, so that if Lisa wanted to move in right now, she could go in with a toothbrush and that's it, unquote. As a result, Graceland does not allow tourists to go upstairs to the second level of the home where Elvis and Lisa Marie's bedrooms are. This helps to maintain a level of privacy for the Presley family, allowing them to still stay at the house. Lisa Marie visits Memphis often during the holidays and stays at Graceland during those visits with her children. When Priscilla Presley opened Graceland to the public on June 7, 1982, she had no idea how many people would come. To her surprise, the 3,000 tickets available to visit Graceland the very first day sold out. Over 35 years later, Graceland has become one of the most visited private homes in the United States. Graceland receives about 600,000 visitors each year, compared to the White House and the Biltmore Estate, which both receive approximately 900,000 visitors per year. In 1991, Elvis Presley's Graceland was listed on the National Register of Historic Places. In 2006, Graceland was declared a National Historic Landmark by the National Park Service. In 2016, Graceland welcomed its 20 millionth visitor. Muhammad Ali, who the Beatles met in February 1964, was an influential figure during the 1960s and 1970s, not only in the sports world, but globally. Ali is considered by many to be the greatest heavyweight boxer of all time. "I'm the greatest" became Ali's catchphrase even before it was true. "It's not bragging if you can back it up," Ali once said. In December 1970, John Lennon wrote a song inspired by Muhammad Ali called "I'm the Greatest." It was a sarcastic commentary by Lennon on his own rise to fame. Always looking out for his pal, Ringo, a few years later Lennon decided to tailor the lyrics to Ringo Starr's life and gave the song to his fellow ex-Beatle to record instead. Quote, "I'm the greatest?" It's the Muhammad Ali line, you know, I couldn't sing it, but it was perfect for Ringo, John Lennon explained. He could say I'm the greatest and people wouldn't get upset. Whereas if I said, I'm the greatest, they'd all take it so seriously, unquote. Released in November 1973, I'm the Greatest was the opening track on Starr's 1973 album, Ringo. John Lennon, George Harrison and Ringo all appeared on the song, marking the only time that three ex-Beatles recorded together before Lennon's death. I'm the Greatest was recorded just 1 month after Elvis Presley and Muhammad Ali first met and were photographed together. On February 14, 1973, Presley presented Ali with a specially made robe in Las Vegas. Quote, Ali said he really liked the way Elvis dressed, explained Presley's friend, George Klein. He said they were both originals. So Elvis contacted his designer and ordered a robe made for Ali and presented it to him. It said, "The People's Choice." It was supposed to say, "The People's Champ." But Ali wore it anyway. Howard Cosell asked Ali, "Where did you get that beautiful robe?" Ali told him, "Elvis gave it to me," unquote. Presley and Ali remained friends until Elvis's death in 1977. Ali recalled that when they met in Las Vegas in 1973, Elvis was closing his February concert run there, and had invited Ali to drive back to Los Angeles with him in his gold-plated Cadillac station wagon. Ali wanted to, but had plans to return to Louisville instead. Years later, he regretted that decision. "Man, that would have been historic," Ali said. "I always wanted Elvis to drive me down Beale Street in a convertible, so his hometown could see that Muhammad Ali and Elvis Presley were good friends. Then I'd bring him to Louisville and do the same thing," unquote. During Elvis Week on August 16, 1985, Muhammad Ali agreed to speak at the annual memorial service for Presley sponsored every year in Memphis by George Klein. Ali had just been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease in 1984, but he won over the crowd of Elvis fans when he sang a few lines a cappella of one of his favorite Presley songs, "Don't Be Cruel." Ali then gave a very heartfelt speech about his friend. Quote, "We black people are kind of funny about music," Ali told the crowd of Elvis fans. "We aren't going to follow someone unless they've got soul, Little Richard, Chuck Berry, Michael Jackson, but the only white boy that had soul, who could sing as good as any of them was Elvis. He had singing ability, he had everything, he was pretty, I know. And when it comes to boxing, nobody has the class, the style, the wit, the speed, the beauty of Ali. And when it comes to singing, nobody had everything like Elvis. I'll tell the world, Elvis was the greatest of all time," unquote. That day, Ali visited Graceland. There is a photo of him at the meditation garden paying respects to his friend that he greatly admired. In 1988, Ali donated the robe that Elvis gave him to the Hard Rock Cafe in New York. Quote, "People don't realize what they had till it's gone," observed Ali. "Like President Kennedy, there was no one like him, the Beatles, and my man Elvis Presley. I was the Elvis of boxing. Elvis was my close personal friend," recalled Ali. "He came to my Deer Lake training camp about 2 years before he died. I don't admire nobody, but Elvis Presley was the sweetest, most humble and nicest man you'd want to know," unquote. On October 9, 1985, which would have been John Lennon's 45th birthday, a large tear-shaped section of Central Park was renamed Strawberry Fields. This section of the park stretches from 71st to 74th Streets on the Upper West Side of Manhattan and sits directly across the street from the Dakota Building. Strawberry Fields contains pathways that John and Yoko used to stroll together over the years from 1973 until 1980, when Lennon was tragically killed. In honor of John Lennon, the memorial was named after his famous Beatles song, "Strawberry Fields Forever," which was inspired by a local orphanage in Liverpool. The idea for Strawberry Fields was conceived by Yoko Ono. In August 1981, Ono placed letters in the New York Times and many other newspapers asking for donations from other countries to create this peace garden. Many countries sent native plants, for example, an oak tree from Great Britain, dogwoods from Monaco, tulip bulbs from the Netherlands, maples from Canada, etc. And, of course, strawberries were planted by the Central Park Conservancy. The famous gray and white marble Imagine mosaic, which is the centerpiece of the area, was a gift from the city of Naples, Italy. Yoko selected an ancient mosaic design found in Naples and placed the word Imagine in the center, according to author Sarah Cedar Miller. The people of Naples were delighted, and artisans were dispatched to Strawberry Fields to inlay the Imagine mosaic medallion, faithfully copying the design Yoko had chosen, unquote. The groundbreaking ceremony for Strawberry Fields was held on March 21, 1984, with Yoko Ono and Lennon's sons Julian and Sean in attendance. A bronze plaque which was unveiled at the dedication ceremony lists 121 countries who endorsed this Garden of Peace. While most people think of the Imagine mosaic section as the major part of Strawberry Fields, there are actually 5.3 acres in total that make up the entire area. Yoko worked with landscape architect Bruce Kelly to create a fitting memorial to Lennon that was more nature than culture. The area is shaded by elm trees and provides many benches for visitors to relax and imagine. Strawberry Fields is intended as a quiet place for reflection, designated as a quiet zone in the park. The gray and white marble Imagine mosaic has become a gathering place for Beatles and Lennon fans. Since there is no Lennon gravesite to visit, fans come to the mosaic to mourn the death of Lennon every year on December 8, and also to celebrate his birthday on October 9. Yoko Ono still lives in the Dakota and her windows overlook the Imagine mosaic at 72nd Street and Central Park West. While the word Imagine is recognized for Lennon's famous song first released in 1971, it is also a concept that Ono had portrayed in her artwork long before she met Lennon. John even admitted that he got the idea for the song from her. The song, quote, should be credited as a Lennon-Ono song, because a lot of it, the lyric and the concept, came from Yoko, John Lennon said in a 1980 interview, shortly before he died. In 2017, the National Music Publishers Association announced that Ono would share songwriting credits for Lennon's Imagine. Those days, I was a bit more selfish, a bit more macho, and I sort of omitted to mention her contribution, Lennon added, noting that the song makes direct reference to Yoko's 1964 book, Grapefruit. It was Yoko's intention to continue the world peace sentiment that she and Lennon had initiated in 1969, which included planting an acorn in England and then sending acorns to heads of state around the world. In her 1981 public letter, Ono said, John would have been very proud that this was given to him, an island named after his song, rather than a statue or a monument. It will be nice to have the whole world in one place, one field, living and growing together in harmony, unquote. On January 23, 1986, Julian and Sean Lennon took part in the first annual Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony. On behalf of their father, John Lennon, they helped induct Elvis Presley into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame along with Jack Sodden, president and executive director of Graceland, and Memphis DJ and close Elvis friend, George Klein. Julian Lennon, aged 22, appeared in all black, while 10-year-old Sean was dressed in a handsome white tuxedo. Julian, with Sean standing at his side, was the first speaker in the presentation of Elvis Presley's award, followed by Jack Sodden. The award was then accepted on Elvis's behalf by George Klein. That night at the induction ceremony, Julian Lennon started out with a brief introduction, quote, "Our father was a big fan of Elvis's and, of course, Elvis was loved all over the world, and we are all influenced by him," Julian said. "I think a lot of people in the world get a lot of pleasure from listening to him and love him greatly," unquote. Then he read a direct quote from John Lennon, which spoke volumes, quote, "Elvis was the thing, whatever people say, he was it. I was not competing against Elvis, rock happened to be the media I was born into, it was the one, that's all. Those people who picked up paintbrushes, like Van Gogh, probably wanted to be Renoir or whomever went before him. I wanted to be Elvis," unquote. Then, Jack Sodden read a brief statement from Lisa Marie Presley. He then introduced George Klein, who gave a dramatic and celebratory speech about his friend and the best man at his wedding. Here is just a brief part of the speech. On January 8, 1935, a star was born. You see, a star is not made, a star is born. The real honest-to-goodness rags-to-riches rise of the most inspiring version of the American dream to ever happen. In doing so, Elvis fulfilled the hopes and dreams of an entire generation. The world was never to be the same again. You see, Elvis Presley wasn't a star, he was a damn galaxy, unquote. Other inductees that night at the induction ceremony in New York City included Little Richard, Jerry Lee Lewis, James Brown, Chuck Berry, Buddy Holly, and Sam Phillips. Notably, Elvis Presley holds the record for being inducted into the greatest number of Music Hall of Fames, 16 and counting. The Beatles were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1988, and since then each member has been inducted separately in subsequent years. While John Lennon was quite reflective in interviews about his career and life as a Beatle, especially during the numerous 1980 interviews he did while promoting Double Fantasy, it took a while before Paul, George, and Ringo started talking about their past. Their watershed moment came in the monumental film, book and music project called The Beatles Anthology. In their own words, the three remaining Beatles, Paul, George, and Ringo, affectionately labeled the Threetles by the media, reflected on the full career and achievements of the Beatles. They brought John Lennon back from the dead, at least on record, by using old demo tapes of his of two unfinished songs, Free as a Bird and Real Love. McCartney, Harrison, and Starr worked on the recordings to create two new Beatles records which were released as singles in December 1995 and March 1996, respectively. The three former band members, now in their 50s, as well as people from their inner circle, were interviewed at length about the career of the Beatles from start to finish. An abridged television special aired in the US on ABC TV in 1995, and then the full 8-part home video set was released in 1996. Paul, George, and Ringo reminisced about meeting Elvis in 1965, and also George and Ringo recalled seeing Elvis again in the 1970s, even though their memories may have been fuzzy. I felt I'd met him several times, Ringo told George and Paul, as they all laughed. I have some memories that I met him several times, Ringo said. Maybe it was just the one night and I kept bumping into him, unquote. These are called flashbacks, I think, Paul chimed in. I met him in Madison Square Garden, George recalled. I just wanted to say, just get your jeans on and get your guitar and do, that's all right, mama, unquote. I went to see him in Vegas in the 70s, after the... Ringo struggled to remember. You couldn't get close to Elvis, Ringo observed. It's not like we could have become good friends. It was impossible, unquote. Ringo also commented on the fact that Elvis had dissed the Beatles to President Nixon. The saddest part is now, years and years later, we found out that he tried to have us banished from America, because he was very big with the CIA and everything. That's very sad to me, that he felt so threatened that he thought, like a lot of people, that we were bad for the American youth, laughs, unquote. While the four men may have had different memories for certain incidents during their career, one thing they did agree on was their empathy for Elvis Presley's plight of going through the struggles and stress of fame on his own. The Beatles knew they had it a lot easier having each other to lean on. That was the good thing about being four together, not like Elvis, observed George Harrison. I always felt sorry for Elvis 'cause he was on his own. He had his guys with him, but there was only one Elvis. Nobody else knew what he felt like, but for us we all shared the experience, unquote. Elvis went downhill because he seemed to have no friends, just a load of sycophants, said Ringo Starr. Whereas with us, individually we all went mad, but the other three always brought us back. That's what saved us, unquote. That is the main problem with fame, that people forget how to act normally, explained George Harrison. They are not in awe of you, but in awe of the thing that they think you've become. It's a concept that they have of stardom and notoriety. So they act crazy, unquote. The Beatles were the closest to Elvis in reaching that level of fame. Even though the Beatles only experienced that height of adulation for about 6 years as a group, they were probably the only ones who could understand what Presley went through. This may be the most important link between Elvis and the Beatles as superstars. The Beatles and Elvis understood each other in a deeper sense than anyone else ever could. "When I feel my head start to swell, I just look at Ringo and know we're not Supermen," John Lennon said during the height of Beatlemania in 1964. "The thing is, we never believed in Beatlemania, never took the whole thing that seriously, I suppose," observed Paul McCartney. "That way, we managed to stay sane," unquote. With John Lennon gone, Paul McCartney was the only one left in the songwriting team of Lennon and McCartney to carry out the legacy of those classic Beatles songs. But it was a mantle that Paul took a while to feel comfortable with. "I don't actually want to be a living legend," McCartney said in 1989. "I came in this to get out of having a job. And to pull birds. And I pulled quite a few birds, and got out of having a job, so that's where I am still," unquote. Paul McCartney did his own tribute to the rock and roll music he grew up listening to, similar to Lennon's rock and roll album, with his 1999 album, Run Devil Run. McCartney included 3 tracks recorded by Elvis Presley on the album: All Shook Up, I Got Stung, and Party. In 2005, Paul taped a concert special for PBS's Great Performances TV series to promote his latest album, Chaos and Creation in the Backyard. It was filmed at Abbey Road Studio 2, where many of the Beatles' songs were recorded. During one segment of the show, McCartney unveiled a mystery object. Quote, "I'm gonna have great pleasure in revealing this. This is the original Elvis Presley bass," Paul said as he removed a black sheet covering the legendary instrument that he proudly owned. The small studio audience responded with "Who" and applause. "Exactly," replied Paul. "This is the one, this is the bass. Those Elvis fans amongst you will recognize this little dashing white trim that is on all the early album covers. It was played by Bill Black, Elvis's bass player. I always loved to imagine Bill would be here and Elvis would be standing right there, yeah," McCartney said as he excitedly pointed to a spot in front of him. "One of the stories I heard about this bass was that in the early days, Elvis, Scotty Moore, his guitar player, and Bill Black used to work as a trio, and they would be working locally in Tennessee and places like that," McCartney continued. "So you have to imagine a beautiful starry night going along the interstate, Elvis driving, Scotty Moore and Bill Black and this little baby strapped to the roof rack," unquote. Paul then began singing Heartbreak Hotel, accompanied only by his playing of the stand-up bass, a touching tribute to Elvis, Scotty and Bill. In fact, McCartney had become friends with Scotty Moore when he recorded a song for a PBS American Masters special released in November 2001. Paul McCartney recorded Presley's first song, That's All Right, with Elvis's original drummer, DJ Fontana, and guitarist Scotty Moore. The program was called Good Rockin' Tonight, The Legacy of Sun Records. Moore and McCartney reportedly stayed friends after that. In November 2015, Paul McCartney called Scotty Moore's house where Moore's girlfriend, Gail Pollock, was in hospice battling cancer. According to singer Ronnie McDowell, McCartney talked to her for 30 minutes. Sadly, Gail passed away a few weeks later. Scotty Moore died the following year on June 28, 2016. Quote, "Without him and Bill Black, to me, there would have not been no Elvis," McDowell said. "Because it took all 3 of those elements to make and do what they did. Scotty was as much a part of that sound as Elvis's voice," unquote. After Scotty Moore's death, Paul McCartney said this about his musical hero and friend, quote, "When we were growing up in Liverpool, the sound of Scotty's guitar on early Elvis records was nothing short of miraculous. It sounded to us like nothing we'd ever heard before, and the gods in Valhalla couldn't have made a better sound." His technical skills, mixed with his sometime wild abandon, set the perfect tone for Elvis's vocals. "Rest in peace, Scotty, one of the great gods of the guitar," unquote. In June 1970, Ringo Starr worked with Presley's original drummer DJ Fontana, and Presley's former backup group, the Jordanaires, on his second solo album, Because of Blues. They were part of a group of Nashville musicians that were hired to play on Starr's country album, which was recorded in Nashville at Music City Recorders. The recording sessions were engineered by Scotty Moore. "He's one of the finest drummers," Fontana said about Starr. "He played that steady tempo. He was the glue for the Beatles. He put it together for them. That's what they needed. He had the greatest conception of tempo I've ever heard in my life. I have never heard anybody play that steady in my life, and that's a long time." Unquote. Years later, Ringo Starr recorded his own version of Presley's 1956 hit "Don't Be Cruel." It was released as the B-side to Starr's 1992 CD single, "Weight of the World." Meanwhile, George Harrison formed a new band in the late 1980s with other rock musicians called the Traveling Wilburys. The short-lived supergroup included Harrison along with Roy Orbison, Bob Dylan, Jeff Lynne of ELO and Tom Petty. They had great success with their first single "Handle with Care" and first album, Traveling Wilburys Volume 1. Shortly after the release of their first album, Orbison died suddenly of a heart attack in December 1988. They recorded a second Wilburys album in 1990 without Orbison. Roy Orbison was one of Elvis Presley's favorite singers. Elvis even called Orbison the greatest singer in the world one time in December 1976 when he made a surprise appearance on stage at one of Roy's shows in Las Vegas. Orbison had known Presley since 1956 when he recorded his first single, "Ooby Dooby," for Sun Records. As a result, Elvis would most likely have been honored that Orbison stood in for him as part of a $1 Million Quartet-type reunion. He, along with Johnny Cash, Jerry Lee Lewis and Carl Perkins, released an album in 1986 called Class of '55. It was in part a tribute to Elvis as well as Sun Records founder, Sam Phillips. The Elvis tribute song, "We Remember the King," was one of the tracks on the album. Shortly after Presley's death, the four Sun Records alums had appeared together to sing a song in tribute to Elvis. On the Johnny Cash Christmas special in December 1977, they sang Cash's song, "This Train is Bound for Glory." In the late 1990s, George Harrison got the chance to meet Scotty Moore and DJ Fontana while they were touring in Europe to promote their 1997 CD, "All the King's Men." George invited Scotty and DJ to his house in England. Harrison spent the afternoon with Moore and Fontana and hosted a country-style dinner for them. Harrison showed them a rare 8x10 autographed photo he recently got of an early promo picture of Elvis, Scotty, and Bill in Western shirts. All three had signed the photo and Harrison was thrilled and Moore verified that the signatures were authentic. Harrison then took them up to his guitar room, which contained almost every guitar George had played with the Beatles and as a solo artist. He brought out a balalaika and started playing and singing one of Presley's tunes, "Trying to Get to You." Scotty joined in on guitar in what you could call a mini jam session. Then, according to music producer Dan Griffin, who was also there that night, George asked Scotty if he could play him the guitar solo on Presley's "Too Much." Quote, "Scotty told him he had not played it since they recorded it and couldn't remember it," recalled Griffin. George said, "That's okay, I can't remember a Hard Day's Night either," unquote. On December 30, 1999, George Harrison was attacked by an intruder in his Friar Park mansion in England. He was stabbed over 40 times by a mentally deranged man who had broken into the home. Harrison's wife, Olivia, stopped the attack by striking the assailant repeatedly with a lamp and fireplace poker. Luckily, George quickly recovered after suffering head injuries and a punctured lung. The knife had missed Harrison's heart by less than an inch. "I believed I had been fatally stabbed," Harrison said later. "It was a horrific attack for anyone to endure, let alone someone who had recently been diagnosed with cancer." In 1997, Harrison had been diagnosed with throat cancer, which he blamed on years of smoking. After treatment, his cancer was thought to be in remission, until 2001 when it was reported that George was being treated for lung and brain cancer. Sadly, on November 29, 2001, George Harrison passed away at the age of 58. Just 2 weeks before he died, the Threetles, Paul, George and Ringo, reunited for the last time on November 12, 2001. Paul and Ringo flew to New York, where George was being treated, to have a special lunch together. Quote, "They knew this was their last supper," a source close to McCartney said. "It was really emotional. There were some tears, but there was more laughter than anything else, unquote. Harrison's funeral was held at the Self-Realization Fellowship Lake Shrine in Pacific Palisades, California, the same place where Elvis used to go in the 1960s for spiritual inspiration. Paul McCartney said about George, quote, "He was a lovely guy and a very brave man and had a wonderful sense of humor. He is really just my baby brother," unquote. A year later, on the first anniversary of Harrison's death, Paul and Ringo publicly paid tribute to their former bandmate at the concert for George. They joined a vast array of musicians, including Eric Clapton, Tom Petty and Jeff Lynne, to perform Harrison songs in tribute to their friend. 35 years after Elvis Presley died, Paul McCartney finally visited Graceland for the first time. He posted a photo of himself on social media placing a guitar pick on Presley's grave in the Meditation Garden on May 26, 2013. McCartney said that he donated the pick so Elvis can play in heaven. McCartney was also given a private tour of Graceland and the Graceland archives during that visit. He posted another photo of himself on Twitter holding Elvis Presley's guitar with the caption, "Guitar Man at Graceland." It had been a long and winding road for McCartney, from his early days as a teenager trying to imitate Presley's songs and wearing his hair slicked back like Elvis, along with his bandmates John Lennon and George Harrison. They weren't playing much of Elvis's stuff on the radio in those days, McCartney said. To hear Heartbreak Hotel, I had to go into a record shop in Liverpool and listen to it through headphones in one of those booths. It was a magical moment, the beginning of an era, unquote. In his later years, it seemed that this elder statesman of rock and roll was able to express his appreciation for Presley in a way he had never done in his youth. Quote, "When we were kids growing up in Liverpool, all we ever wanted was to be Elvis Presley," McCartney reminisced. All we ever wanted was to be Elvis